The story begins with the life of a man called Rick who, at first, seems to be being beaten up. He thinks he's going to die, but we discover that he's actually being trained, and his superiors turn to him and tell him he's ready for the exam. The scene then changes, and we see several adventurers in the guild signing up for the E rank exam. Alyssa, who is the receptionist, is guiding the staff, and when it comes to Rick, she recognizes him as they have worked together before until he left determined to become an adventurer. It's noticeable that he's very nervous. After all, he's over 30, and normally only teenagers start at rank F and then progress, and only after 2 years do young people move up to rank E. So he might not even be able to move up a rank because he's so old. Alyssa asks him what he's been doing for the last 2 years, and he replies that he's been training in the mountains. But out of nowhere, a drunk man appears and starts hitting on Alyssa. Rick tries to calm the situation by holding the man down, but for some bizarre reason the man passes out. Rick thinks the man just had too much to drink. After receiving his password for the exam, he becomes very afraid when he sees that his number represents the number of bad luck, and this makes him very worried. But he goes ahead and meets Rionette, who is one of his teachers. Meanwhile, everyone left inside the guild notices that a handprint has been left on the drunk man's armor. They realize that this man was an A-class adventurer and begin to wonder what happened to him. And Alyssa begins to wonder if it was Rick who knocked that man out. When Rick's physical begins, many people are surprised to discover that he is taking the exam at the age of 32. Afterwards, all the candidates are asked to line up and place their hands on a kind of crystal ball. Depending on the light that the crystal emits, the person will be classified according to their mana rank. The candidates begin to place their hands on the ball, and each one's rank is measured. But when Rick touches the ball, it shows that his mana is rank F, the lowest rank of all those taking the exam. Everyone starts mocking him, but as soon as he leaves the room, the ball breaks. In the next test, they have to attack a bag of slime as hard as they can, this being a test to measure their attack strength rank. The sight of this punching bag reminds Rick of his training with his master Bronx. His master, with a huge body, always said that the most important thing was the strength of the body, and that the body was even more important than the weapon. So at the time he sent Rick to destroy a bag of golden slime. Rick knows that golden slimes are as tough as a dragon's tusk, so he thinks it's impossible to break it with a punch. But Bronston tells him that this is the minimum strength for an adventurer, and even shows him that he himself can destroy several at once. Then he asks Rick to punch the bag more than 50,000 times. When the test begins, a cocky boy called Fred steps forward, and we soon learn that even though he is only 11 years old, this boy has an incredible amount of magical power. Fred prepares a spell and casts a rank 3 fire spell. At first glance the blow looks weak, but the judges are impressed and call him a genius. Rick is amazed by what he sees because he knows that the pyromancy class is very strong in Dark Souls 2, and one of his senpais used the same magic to attack him. He concludes that Fred must have condensed the impact of the attack into a small flame in order to adapt to an enclosed environment, and so he assumes that the boy must be a prodigy. The other candidates continue with the test, and when it's finally Rick's turn, the examiner asks him to give up as he's too old to start life as an adventurer. But Rick believes that age doesn't matter and remembers how much he has trained over the last 2 years. He punches the slime bag and destroys it completely. Everyone is shocked to see this, and Fred can't believe that Rick has stolen the show, but he thinks it's okay since defense magic is his specialty, so the boy plans to show Rick his place in the next test. But Rick surprises everyone again by defending himself against a rank 4 spell that the examiner cast at him. The examiner prepares to use a level 5 spell and asks Rick to use a stronger defense spell, but Rick says that he is only capable of using level 1 spells. But even with this deficiency, he is confident in his abilities. So the examiner decides not to hold back, casting a powerful level 5 cyclone attack spell, which destroys even the barrier around them. Meanwhile, Sylvester, the highest-ranked royal knight, notices the shock waves in the distance and rushes to the examination center, where an examiner tells him about Rick, and we soon see that he has managed to block the attack. Sylvester can't believe that Rick, a 32-year-old man who was just a receptionist at the guild 2 years ago, is doing well in the test to become an adventurer. After that, we see Rick taking a theory test, and then he meets with Rionette. She asks him how the exam went, and he's confident that he'll get 100 points in the written exam, but he's not sure about his practical assessments. Fred suddenly appears, and Rick can't remember his name, so he gets angry and accuses Rick of having stolen his chance to shine during the exam. Rick tries to calm him down, but Angelica, Fred's sister, appears and challenges Rick to a duel, throwing her glove at him because he made her brother cry. He takes the glove, saying that doing laundry isn't easy, but Rionette tells him that taking his opponent's glove means accepting the challenge. Because of this, they head to the arena, and we learn that Angelica is a second-class royal knight, and she says that the loser of the duel will become a servant of the winner for life, something very cliché in magic school anime. Rionette informs Rick that a second-class knight normally has a B rank in the Adventurers Guild. He's terrified as his rank is F, and he starts to think he's going to die, but Rionette tells him to remember his training, so he remembers how much he's suffered and vomits instantly. She asks him to trust himself since he is now a member of their group, which in this case is the strongest group on the continent, which unfortunately I, being cockroach-brained, won't be able to pronounce here for you. After being called to attention by Rionette, he keeps his cool again. So they both prepare to fight, and Angelica says she'll take it easy so he doesn't die. She strengthens her body with magic and advances against him, but Rick manages to dodge the attack. Fred observes and comments that his sister is known for being very fast. She then uses the instant step technique to attack, but Rick dodges again with ease while wondering why she is so slow. Angelica can't believe he dodged again, as only a few first-class knights can react to that speed. She thinks he's just lucky and attacks again, but Rick can't believe how slow she is. He wonders if she became a royal knight because of a relative or a close friend, or if maybe he's just too strong. He prepares to dodge, but this time Angelica trips over a stone, spins in the air, and swings too fast so that Rick can barely dodge the attack. He is impressed by her technique and realizes that he was arrogant to think that he was stronger than her. Angelica pretends she did it on purpose and prepares to attack at triple speed, but Rick still thinks everything is too slow. She continues attacking, and he prepares to parry the next blow, but then out of nowhere she trips again, and he misses his attack. When the dust settles, everyone is shocked by a gigantic hole in the ground, and Angelica realizes that she would have died if she hadn't tripped. She wonders who he is, and Rick replies that he's just a former receptionist who decided to become an adventurer. He is impressed by what a second-class knight can do, and is excited to learn even more from her. He says he's going to punch her with all his might, but she surrenders on the spot. Rick doesn't believe it, but she says she'll give him the victory as a gift for having managed to avoid her instant move. She starts to walk away, but Rick reminds her of the agreement. She must become his servant. But Angelica is no fool and quickly runs away from him. Rick starts thinking about the exam, wondering if he'll be able to pass, and Rionette tells him that Bronston and the others will be arriving soon. He asks why they're coming, and she says it's just to check on him. This makes him panic because he knows that nothing good ever happens when that group of monstrous adventurers get together. The next day, Alice tells them that the judges are going to send magical energy to the admission card. She explains that if the card turns red, the participant has failed and will need to try again next year, but if it turns blue, it means they have passed. Rionette tells Rick to stop worrying, recalling his extremely difficult training over the last 2 years, which makes him feel a little more confident, but she mentions that if he fails, his training will be tripled. When the magical energy is sent to Rick's card, the card begins to glow, alternating between red and blue. He's nervous about this, but finally the card turns blue, so he can leave the hall with a big smile and his head held high, walking alongside Rionette. But suddenly he smells something strong. A young man called Raster approaches Rionette and introduces himself as the Duke of the Northern Kingdom. He starts flirting with her, saying he'd like to make her his second wife, and Rick intervenes, but Raster calls Rick an ugly old man. Rick then says that Rionette is his girlfriend, which makes Raster laugh, and then he starts mocking Rick, saying that as well as being old and ugly, he's only a rank F adventurer. Rick then comments that Raster doesn't look that strong, but Raster reveals that he's a rank S adventurer, and also reveals that he reached rank S when he was only 14 years old. He explains that he is the examiner for the second stage of the exam and turns to Rionette, inviting her to have dinner with him, but she tells him to stay away as she is Rick's girlfriend. She also says that his perfume is too strong for her taste. Raster is furious and promises to beat Rick up. Then Fred and Angelica arrive and grab Raster. After all, he is their brother. The little one says that Rick made fun of him, so he plans to take revenge. Angelica could make things worse, but she doesn't say anything. When Rick arrives at the examination center, he learns that the next test will be a mock battle. Rionette advises him to hold back, but he thinks he'll have to give it his all, especially if Raster is his examiner. Out of nowhere, a man called Lynx appears and introduces himself as Rick's examiner, making him feel a little more relieved. He mentions that he also became an adventurer late in life, and says that it took him 20 years to reach rank B. He tells Rick that he is a great motivation for middle-aged men who want to fulfill their dreams. After saying this, Lynx leaves while commenting to himself that Rick seems to have trained hard for this exam. But Raster suddenly appears, saying that they need to talk. After a while, the candidates are told that Lynx has fallen ill and that Raster will be taking over as examiner. Rick and the other participants are worried as Raster is known as the Man of 1,000 Spells, and his other nickname is the F-Rank Crusher. Rick realizes that he is in trouble and thinks about running away, but knows that his superiors will triple his training if he doesn't succeed. Rionette comforts him again, saying that she believes in him. But a hooded boy suddenly approaches him and offers to tell him about his future. He takes a crystal ball and tells Rick to sit down, but Rionette realizes that there is a spell on the chair, and Rick ends up disappearing before she can do anything. She gets furious and destroys the ball, revealing that the person who planned this trap with the teleportation spell was Little Fred. She asks him where Rick has been taken and threatens him, saying she'll stick his head up her own ass. The frightened boy reveals that he transported Rick 100 meters away from there, and that he must currently be near the beach. At the same time, we see that Rick is surrounded by people dressed in black, and one of them introduces the group, revealing that their task is to get rid of Rick. Rick realizes that this is part of Raster's plan, and the man reveals that they are all above rank B, so he doesn't stand a chance against them. However, Rick's teachers suddenly appear, demanding to know what's going on, but Rick tells them that these men are just helping him warm up for the exam. He asks his enemies to flee if they want to save their lives, but one of them attacks Bronx, and his blade shatters on contact with his skin. The Bronx breaks the man's fist, and also heals him instantly, giving the man another chance to attack him. Another of Rick's masters called Mizit tells him to stop worrying, and draws his gun and shoots the men with his magic bullets. Another member of Rick's team called Alice is taken hostage by one of the men, and he demands that they all hand over their weapon. Rick tells him to let her go for her own good, but the man threatens to hurt her, so she gets angry and drives him away with her power. The leader of the men realizes who they are, recognizing Alice as the strongest mage in the world, Mayat as the greatest weapons craftsman, and Bronx as a master of all kinds of support magic. Together they are the strongest group on the planet, which my editor will put on the screen for you. After the introductions, Alice finishes off the remaining guards, while Rick runs back to the examination room to find Rionette. When he returns, Rionette throws Fred away, but Lynx suddenly appears, revealing that Raster has forced him out of his job as examiner and locked him in a room. He asks Rick to leave the examination room for his safety, but Rick gets up and goes over to Raster to confront him. We then see that Raster was tormenting the others in the arena, while a man called Agilo looked on. This man has the unique ability to see people's main statistics, which are strength, dexterity, mana capacity, and magical control. A competitor with average stats is defeated by Raster's lightning magic, and when Agilo checks his stats, he sees that Raster has an insane amount of mana. His eyes start to hurt because looking at someone powerful causes him pain, but he realizes that Rick is entering the field, so he checks his stats. At this point, Agilo is shocked because Rick has all his stats maxed out except for mana. Having looked at someone so powerful using his power, he ends up feeling unbearable pain. Meanwhile, Lisa meets Rionette, and she introduces herself as Rick's former work colleague. Rionette invites her to sit with them. Bronson asks Rionette what she thinks of Rick, and she believes he'll easily pass the exam. But Lisa thinks otherwise since Raster is known for crushing F-rank competitors with his magic. Before the mock battle, Raster praises Rick for escaping his guards, but tells him not to get too confident. Rick asks why Raster became an adventurer, and he reveals that he was born a genius, so he decided to become a rank to gain prestige. However, he plans to give up this life as he's had enough of it. The fight finally begins, and Raster fires a blast of ice at Rick, but he doesn't move. Raster thinks that Rick must be very scared, but we learn that he has only decided to follow Rionette's advice to keep calm for the first minute of the battle and only attack after fully observing his opponent. Raster launches his next attack, which creates a huge explosion, but Rick doesn't suffer a scratch. Lisa is surprised, and Bronston tells her about Rick's intense training, in which he was forced to wear 100 kilos of weights on his ankles and run through a forest full of demonic snakes. Raster attacks him relentlessly, but Rick remains calm. Bronston reveals that Meist was Rick's magical trainer, while Rionette was in charge of training only his dexterity. Lisa is surprised to hear this, as she thought Rionette was just a maid. Bronston mentions that Rick's power is equal to that of an S-rank adventurer, but he isn't aware of how strong it is. Raster uses his earth magic to crush Rick and thinks the fight is over, but Rick manages to free himself. Raster gets angry and tries to punch Rick, but is countered and ends up being hit. Raster can't understand how Rick is blocking his attacks, while Rick has already observed him completely. He realizes that despite Raster's incredible power, his lack of proper training makes his movements inefficient. Raster uses his fire magic, but Rick blocks it. Mice tells Lisa that Rick only used 1% of his strength to block the attack. Raster approaches with his instant step, but Rick knocks him back, commenting that Raster is too slow. Raster admits that Rick is too skilled for an F rank, but also reveals that he's not fighting at full strength, as he's tired after defeating the other competitors. He calls Rick lucky, which makes Rick furious because Raster still doesn't recognize his strength. Rick then tells him about the insane training he went through and says that he put his life on the line to get stronger. Mice tells Lisa that Rick died several times during his training, but Bronston revived him. Rick was only able to reach his current level because he managed to overcome his physical limitations by never giving up. In the arena, Raster mocks him, asking why Rick would put himself through such difficult training. Rick then reveals that he wants to defeat the strongest monster in the world, called Kaiser Alipia. His name was written in the legend of the hero Yamato. Bronston reveals that defeating the monster is the ultimate goal of their group, but Raster says he doesn't believe this monster is real. He traps Rick with his earth magic and creates a huge tree golem. But Rick uses a basic airshot spell, which he has practiced 100 million times, freeing himself from the roots. Lisa is surprised to hear such a large number, as it seems impossible that anyone has practiced that much. But Bronston explains that Rick achieved this using a special time and space spell. Raster uses his strongest spell to attack Rick, but he counters with his airshot. Raster, who had become a tree-like golem, shatters and is thrown toward the benches, where he finally falls unconscious. Everyone in the arena is shocked that the strongest examiner has been defeated by an adventurer of rank F. Rick meets up with his group, who congratulate him on passing the test, and he thanks them for their help. Raster appears with his brothers, and Rick tells him that he must train a skill until it reaches its limit. But Raster thinks Rick is making fun of him and tells him that he will be his examiner again in the promotion exam, promising to beat him next time. Raster leaves with his brothers, but Angelica stops for a moment and bows to Rick, leaving him confused. Rick and Rionette wait for the results. When the names of the candidates are announced, Rick seems calm. Rionette asks him how he can be so relaxed, as he was very nervous during the test. But he says he's just remembered something important. Just like that, we're back to when Rick was a child. He reads about the hero Yamato, who dreams of defeating a stronger monster called the Kaiser in order to claim a treasure that can grant any wish. Rick is so inspired by the story that he starts dreaming of becoming an adventurer and shares his dream with his parents. But they don't support him. His father says that this story is nothing more than a tall tale, and his mother worries that becoming an adventurer is too dangerous, so they both ask him to look for a stable job. He is disappointed. One day, a doctor tells him that he has a unique ability that has not yet been activated. He realizes that Yamato also had this rare ability, which makes him very excited because he thinks he has the potential to become a great adventurer. Rick spends his childhood waiting for his ability to be awakened, but as time goes by, he becomes depressed as he sees no progress. His friends suggest that he become an adventurer anyway, because even adventurers without special skills can make good money. But Rick says he wants to fulfill his dream. As time goes by, Rick gives up waiting for his ability to awaken and takes a job as a receptionist at the guild, which makes his parents very happy. He works for 14 years, but doesn't feel fulfilled by the job, and keeps trying to awaken his ability, but nothing works. Finally, Rick gives up on his dream and puts aside the book he used to read as a child. He works with Lisa and goes about his normal life until one day his friend Z shows up and tells him that he has become a rank B adventurer. Rick is surprised. He hides his envy and congratulates his friend, but that same day, he gets drunk and regrets giving up on his dream. He's lost in thought when, out of nowhere, he hears people screaming, and a giant monster appears in front of him. Rionette appears and walks toward the monster, but Rick stops her, trying to protect her without knowing how strong she is. She immediately cuts the monster to pieces, impressing Rick greatly. The two of them start walking together, and when she introduces herself, he is shocked to learn that she is an S-rank adventurer. He asks her if it isn't too late for him to pursue his dream, as he is in his 30s. She then tells him that because of his age, his mana capacity can't be improved, and that he'll probably never make it as an adventurer. Rick is sad but still smiles and invites her to have dinner with him. She accepts the invitation, which surprises Rick, as he didn't think she would. Rick remains happy throughout the next day, but when he's on his way to dinner with Rionette, a group of monsters attacks the town, ruining his plans. Rionette tells him to take them to her, and so she unleashes her attack, eliminating all the monsters in an instant. But suddenly, she feels the presence of a dragon, and her traumatic memories come flooding back, making her unable to control her magical power anymore. A huge dragon appears, and everyone panics. ZY and the other adventurers try to fight the creature, but their attacks have no effect. ZY realizes that they don't stand a chance against such a powerful enemy, so he shouts for everyone to run. But the dragon creates a barrier around them, preventing any chance of escape. Even so, Rick musters all the courage he has and steps forward, saying that he will face the dragon like a true adventurer, even though he is terrified. The others try to stop him, but Rick says he wants to die as an adventurer. This statement ends up motivating everyone there, who also go on the attack against the dragon, but it's no use, as it easily overpowers everyone. Even so, Rick refuses to give up and takes another step forward, but the dragon smashes him to the ground. Everyone thinks he's dead, but in reality, this activates his hidden ability, which he has waited a lifetime to awaken. Suddenly, he stands up, holding the dragon's foot with one hand, and an absurd energy begins to overflow from his body. Rick is happy to see that his ability has finally been activated and challenges the dragon to attack him. The dragon unleashes a puff of fire at him, but Rick blocks it. Then, the dragon changes tactics and fires a laser, but he manages to reflect the attack. In the end, he defeats the dragon, leaving everyone completely shocked. However, this sudden transformation demands too much of his body, and he ends up fainting. When he wakes up, he realizes that Rionette has been waiting for him. She reveals that he has been unconscious for a whole week and invites him to join her group, saying that their ultimate goal is to defeat the great monster Kaiser. She believes in Rick's determination to never give up and says that he can become even stronger if he fights alongside them. She encourages him, saying that he can still become an adventurer despite his age, and he starts to cry because it's the first time anyone has told him to pursue his dream. Back in the present, we see Lynx congratulating Rick on passing the test. He mentions that he'll be discharged from the hospital soon and wants to have a drink with Rick. He also says that he wants to meet Rick's friends. Then, we see Lynx walking and wondering why Rick told him to wear his best armor. He follows the instruction, but is surprised when he arrives at the Demon Lord's castle. He asks if they haven't come the wrong way, but Rick opens the door and apologizes for making him go so far. His friend is surprised to see no monsters inside. Rick mentions that the monsters won't go near the castle, and this makes Lynx wonder why he told him to wear his best armor. Rick then explains that it's to prevent him from dying. Rionette greets Lynx inside, and he sees Alice, which makes him hope that his daughter will grow up to be as strong as her. But suddenly, she fires a bolt of lightning at him, and just as it's about to hit him, Rick deflects it, causing a wall to be destroyed. He reminds Alice that she can't cast magic inside the castle, but she says she misses playing with Rick. Rionette tells her that the costs of the damage will be cut from her food allowance, and the little girl apologizes for her actions. But Rick decides to spend some time with her, as he knows she'll do it again if he doesn't play with her. Rionette takes Lynx to her room, where he notices Meist through the window and goes to talk to him. He is interested in the rocket launcher that Meist is holding, so Meist allows him to test it. As he fires the rocket, he is shocked by its power, which makes him think that if this were mass-produced, wars all over the world would be changed. As Lynx walks through the castle, he comes across Bronston and is impressed by the amount of books he has. Bronston then says that his library is private and reveals that he feels calm when he's surrounded by books, which makes Lynx wonder if he's also part of the group, as out of everyone, Bronston seems to be the most intelligent. He asks Bronston if he's read all the books, but Bronston explains that he hasn't read them all yet because he was busy helping Rick with his training. Lynx asks him to learn from him too, and Bronston accepts the request, as he believes Lynx has the same willpower as Rick. When they start training, Lynx falls off a cliff because of the weights they've tied to him, which makes him think he's going to die. But he survives the fall because he lands on a beast that Rionette had killed for dinner. She realizes that he is being trained by Bronston, and he thanks her for saving his life. But Bronston already drags him back to the castle without giving him time to breathe. After they get back to the castle, Rick comments that he thought they'd gone there for a light training session, but Meist says he shouldn't believe everything that's said. Rionette also wants to play with Lynx, but Rick says he'll turn gray if she plays with him. Meist says it's Rick's fault for inviting him. Rionette offers them tea, and right after she leaves, Lynx asks Rick how far he went with her. But he quickly explains that he doesn't have that kind of relationship with Rionette. He doesn't think they have a chance together since he's in his 30s. But Link says that age is just a number, and even reveals that he and his wife have a 20-year age difference, which makes Link someone who should be arrested. At night, when they're all having dinner, Link tells Rick to help Rionette with the chores, saying that this is a good chance for him to get closer to her. He then goes out to help, and Link comments that he wants to see Rick's special ability. But Bronston explains that this ability only activates under certain conditions, and that Rick has no control over it. Bronston also says that Rick is already as strong as an S-rank adventurer, but that if his ability activates, he'll end up stronger than everyone there. After that, they tell Lynx that their mission is to defeat the Kaiser and ask him if he knows about the 6 magic stones that open the spiral portal where the colossal monster called the Kaiser lies. They know that the 6 gems are about to be activated, as this happens every 200 years, so they think that the stones must be releasing an absurd amount of mana. Link says he'll take a look to see if he can find any clues. Rick asks him for advice on how to get closer to Rionette, saying that he couldn't find anything to help her since she's good at everything. But Lynx just laughs at him. The next day, Rick and the others go to the guild to accept a mission, but Bronston is confused when the guild master says they can't accept. Rick realizes that in order to accept this mission, the group needs to have 4 people and at least 2 rank members. So Bronston asks the guild master to find someone who can complete the team. Then, the guild master warns Ree and calls her, telling her that her day has finally come to take part in a high-rank mission. When the mission begins, Ree asks if they're looking for anything, and Rick replies that they're after a magic stone. She asks if the stone is an expensive item, and Rick says yes. However, he explains that she should be careful when handling the stone, as it could attract monsters. Upon hearing this, Ree assures him that she can handle a few monsters. She asks Rick about his rank, and when he says he's at rank F, she comes to the conclusion that he started as an adventurer too late, and that's why she wants to evolve soon and not become someone like him. Back at the castle, Rionette wonders if everyone is okay, but Meist doesn't think anything will happen to them since this mission is being led by Bronston. Suddenly, Meist uses his new invention to try to see under her skirt, but she catches him doing it and destroys his machine. Meanwhile, Rick and the others come across Ivan, and Ree gets scared, saying they should call for help. But she's shocked when Bronston knocks the creature away with a punch. In her mind, she says, "Wow, what a hot man." She says that he'll end up killing them all because more wyverns will come, and he explains that he didn't kill it. But she can't understand what his plan is. Rick takes her away, and she continues talking about the wyverns, but is shocked when one of them falls nearby. She realizes that Bronston and Rionette are destroying all of them. But suddenly, a shiny wyvern appears in front of her. She comments that even an A-rank adventurer would have a hard time defeating one of these and says they should run. But Rick says he needs to check something and asks her to run. Instead, she decides to fight alongside him. She starts to cast her spell, but is shocked when Rick manages to defeat the creature with one punch, taking its head off in an instant. The next day, Ree comments to the guild master about how Rick took a wyvern corpse to eat. She thinks that after being with them, she would have given up fighting monsters, but in reality, she's even more motivated to get strong. Meanwhile, Rick and the others find one of the magic jewels, and after Meist uses his magic, a map reveals that the next jewel is in Heractopia. We then learn that 400 years ago, Heractopia's 4th king, Alexander, built a colosseum in the city. Tournaments were held there, and the king only used his fists to fight, but he was still undefeated as champion, with a winning streak of 10,000 victories. Rick and the others arrive in Heractopia, and upon seeing Alexander's statue, Bronston comments that he would love to fight him. But Rick says that they would destroy the whole country if that really happened. They try to get information about the 6 jewels, but everyone runs away when they see their group. Rick suggests going to City Hall, but before they leave, they see a girl called Milshaw being harassed. Bronston tries to intimidate the man who is doing it. The man's name is Gold, and he's not scared because he's actually a great fighter. But Bronston thinks he's too weak, and the man gets angry when he hears this. So the two of them go to an alley to fight, but as soon as they start, Gold is defeated on the spot. Afterwards, Bronston shows them the magic jewel and asks if they've seen a crystal like it. Gold and Milshaw say they have, but she can't remember where she saw it. So Bronston asks her to try and remember. Out of nowhere, they are interrupted by a parade announcing the king of the fist tournament. Gold comments that a man called Orwolf has been on a winning streak for 3 years. Gold and Milshaw point to his championship belt, and Rick is shocked that one of the magic gems is embedded in it. After the parade, Orwolf goes to a gym where an old man apologizes for making him take part in the parade. But Orwolf doesn't see a problem with this, as a fighter's job is to ensure that the public enjoys the tournament. The old man asks how he's feeling, and Orwolf says he's fine, and that maybe he'll be better if he finds a worthy opponent. Suddenly, Rick and the others arrive at the gym. The little man thinks they're fans of Orwolf, better known as Kevin. So Rick explains that they're adventurers. But before he can tell him the reason for their visit, Bronston tells him that he wants the belt. He explains that the magic jewel belonged to a former member of their group, and that they are looking for the others. The old man gets angry at these stories and prepares to throw them out, but Orwolf interrupts and says that he believes what Bronston is saying. However, he still says that he won't hand over the belt because it's very important to the people of Heractopia. So the only way to get that belt is to win the King of the Fist tournament. Since there's no other way, Bronston ends up leaving the gym because he doesn't want to cause any trouble. The old man thinks that Orwolf shouldn't have let them go, but he also thinks that if they fought, everyone in the gym would end up dead. He knows that all the members of that group are strong, but he believes that Bronston is the best, so he is very excited to face him. Bronston tells Rick and Rionette that they need to enter the tournament. Then we learn that they have to pass the qualifiers that take place in the eastern and western parts of the city in order to take part. After that, they still have to win a league formed by the people who pass the qualifiers, and the last survivor of this league will be able to enter the tournament. Bronston tells Rick to take part in the West League while he goes to the East League. But Rick is worried about Bronston, as he'll be alone. Bronston says they don't have to worry about him because he's hired Gold as his guide. Afterwards, Rionette tells Rick that he needs to pass a test to get into the qualifiers. When he goes to take the test, a man tells him that he'll have to take part in a mock battle. Rick wonders if his opponent is strong. The man then reveals that the person he's going to fight has won all the qualifying fights. But the guy also comments that it doesn't matter if he loses because he'll still advance if his skill reaches the expected level. Suddenly, we see that the enemy Rick will have to face is Angelica. Rick asks if Raster is with her, but she reveals that she came alone and that she knows she's no match for him since he defeated her brother. When the fight begins, she decides to attack with full force, but out of nowhere, she falls. She gets up and prepares to attack again, but falls once more. Rick reveals that he's using a new technique on her where he keeps attacking the opponent's legs until they surrender. But she refuses to give up and is about to attack again, only for him to keep knocking her down. She says she'll never surrender, and Rick is impressed by her determination, even thinking about attacking her for Real. But just as he's about to do so, she gives up out of the blue. After that, Angelica meets Rick and starts crying, so he takes her to Milsha's restaurant. She asks why he's come to Heractopia, and he explains that he wants to take part in the tournament. She reveals that she became a fighter 4 months ago, and that she also has to go to the tournament no matter what. She thinks it's impossible for Rick to get into the tournament, as a person needs to win 40 fights in 6 months, and she believes he won't make it since there's only 1 week left. But Rionette says that they've already signed up to take part in 40 fights over the next 4 days. Rick comments on his next fight, where the receptionist says that his opponent is a man called Grit Albert, and there are rumors that he uses illegal weapons during the fight. However, forensic examinations were carried out, and they found nothing. When the fight starts, Grit takes a rock out of the sole of his shoe and punches Rick. This makes him think he's won the fight, but he's shocked when he realizes he's broken his hand trying to hit Rick. Rick tells him to train harder if he wants to use the stone to its full potential. So he attacks the man using a technique in which he misses the punch, but the shockwave from the punch knocks out his opponent. Angelica also wins her fight with ease, as she kicks her opponent and throws him against the wall. Afterwards, Rionette and Rick congratulate her, as she has won 40 fights, which means she has passed the qualifier. Angelica tells Rick that he can only take part in 1 fight a day in each location, and although there are many locations in the country, they are very far apart, so it's not possible for him to fight in 10 matches that day. Angelica says that her next match is 30 kilometers away, so even if he takes a carriage, he won't make it in time. But Rick tells her he's in a hurry, so he starts running there. After he leaves, Rionette asks if Angelica wants to watch his game. She explains that she does, but doesn't think it's possible. So Rionette says she'll help her. She grabs Angelica and starts jumping from one roof to another, which scares Angelica. But Rionette says it's the only way they'll make it in time. After 4 days, Angelica can't believe that Rick has actually won 40 matches, and she's glad she's not in the same group as him. Rionette asks if Angelica plans to win the league, but she knows that's not possible as Rick is also taking part. Rionette reveals that even Bronston is taking part, and this puts Angelica off even more. She wonders if Rionette doesn't get tired of following Rick around because people might think they're boyfriend and girlfriend. But Rionette doesn't care because she already has feelings for him. Suddenly, they are interrupted by a man asking for help because of the lack of workers. Meanwhile, Rick is approached by a man called Snape. He's the chairman of the committee that runs the Western League. Rick asks how he knows him, and Snape mentions that he heard about him because he was the fastest person to qualify for the Western League. A man tells Snape that Angelica isn't there, and Rick asks if he knows her. Then he explains that they're close. Rick asks how long it's been since he gave up being a fighter, and this surprises Snape, who asks how Rick found out he was a fighter. Rick then explains that after shaking his hand, he realized that Snape was a trained fighter. Snape reveals that he won a small tournament 20 years ago, but retired at 23. So that tournament was his only victory. He also mentions that his organization is sending a participant to the tournament. Before leaving, he asks Rick to tell Angelica not to try too hard. After that, Rick goes to Milsha's restaurant, and she tells him to be careful, because although Snape looks like a knight, there are many rumors that he has ties to the underworld. She comments that his organization is the sponsor of the tournament, so they can send a participant as they have a free place. Meanwhile, Angelica and Rionette are wearing bunny outfits and trying to convince people to bet on the tournament. Another bunny compliments Angelica on her energy, and she says she didn't take the job because she likes it, but Rionette reminds her that it was Angelica herself who accepted the offer. Suddenly, a bibulous man appears and starts harassing the bunnies. When he tries to get close to Angelica, she and Rionette beat him up. Rick arrives just then and is shocked to see what Angelica is wearing, but his reaction is even worse when he sees Rionette. At the gym, Orwolf and the old man are impressed by Bronston, who managed to get through the Eastern League qualifiers in 2 days. Orwolf is even more surprised when he finds out that Rick did the same thing, only in 4 days. He's excited to fight them, and the look on his face reminds the old man of the time he recruited him to come to Heractopia. The next day, we see that Angelica is very angry with Rick because he reacted very differently when he saw her in her bunny outfit. He and Rionette say that she also looked very pretty, but Angelica is still annoyed. Then Rick comments that he met a man called Snape the day before, which totally changes her mood. She says she doesn't know who he is. After that, the championship to decide who enters the tournament finally begins, and the first fight is between Angelica and a girl called Ellen. Angelica goes straight on the offensive, but Ellen dodges her attack. When she tries to punch Angelica, she blocks the blow. Rick and Rionette notice that Angelica is trying harder than usual, which isn't really her style. Even so, she wins the fight with a kick that throws Ellen straight into a wall. Rick and Angelica continue to win their fights, and she has 4 more matches to go while Rick needs to win them all to get into the tournament. In the next fight, right at the start, Angelica faces a man called Taylor. She begins by throwing a lightning attack at him, but it doesn't work. He punches her and throws her against the wall, winning the fight. After that, Rick tells Angelica that it was noticeable her opponent had a strong defense, so he asks her why she keeps using techniques that drain her stamina. But she leaves without giving an answer. Rick keeps insisting, and Angelica finally says that Snape is her fiancé and that he helped her family when they were in trouble. We then see a flashback to a year ago, where Angelica's parents passed away, so she and her siblings had to take care of the family, but ended up facing financial problems. That's when Angelica's grandfather made a deal with Snape, giving the family financial support in exchange for his engagement to Angelica. With that, they managed to solve their money problem, but it was too late to break the deal with Snape. Rick is shocked to discover that Snape is Angelica's fiancé, and she is annoyed that he didn't stop to listen to her story. Suddenly, they see a guy called Gaff, who is hurting a woman who accidentally bumped into him. Taylor goes up to him, trying to stop the situation, but Gaff knocks him to the ground with a single blow. Gaff starts tearing at the girl's clothes, and Angelica tells him to stop. But then he decides to attack Angelica, only for Rick to step in and stop him. Soon afterwards, Snape appears out of nowhere, telling Gaff to control himself until the tournament. So Gaff decides to leave. Afterwards, Rick is surprised when Snape mentions that Gaff is his brother. Once he leaves, Rick gets his head around it and asks everyone if Snape didn't sponsor the tournament just because of his engagement to Angelica. She thinks this might be true, as he has invested a lot of money in her and his engagement, but he doesn't have enough money for that, so he's probably counting on winning the tournament to make a fortune. Rick knows that a lot of betting takes place in these tournaments, and if Snape intends to make a lot of money from the fights, he probably plans to rig each one. Angelica believes he's going to do this through the fighter he's sponsoring, and she has a great plan to defeat this fighter to make him call off the wedding. But the problem is that the fighter is precisely Gaff, and she knows she doesn't stand a chance against him. So Rick offers to train her. When the training begins, Rick puts weights on Angelica's body and even ties her to it, which leaves her totally confused. But he just tells her to use strengthening magic and start running. He explains that by putting her in contact with someone fast, her body will adapt more quickly to fast movements. She asks for a break, but he tells her that they won't rest for another 6 hours. He's even surprised that she managed to survive the first day and comments that when he was trained by Rionette, he fainted right away. Now Angelica is exhausted, but she's happy to have survived the first day, only to be shocked when Rick tells her that it was all just a warm-up. On the 5th day of training, Angelica runs away. She sits in a coffee shop and thinks Rick will never guess where she is, but he shows up in just 15 minutes. She thinks she's going to get a scolding for running away, but Rick understands what she's done because he also thought about giving up several times during his training. He even died several times, but Bronston kept reviving him and always told Rick that he would regret it even more if he gave up on this training, and that made him keep training. She then explains that since she was a child, she was taught to be a noblewoman, but that doesn't suit her, and she wants to contribute to the family by being someone who can fight. She decides to continue training, and Rick tells her that she's an excellent swordsman. But he knows that a fighter needs to fight with their hands, so he thinks she should use techniques that turn her hands into a sword, which is why he's called Rionette to train her. Angelica's next fight is against a man called Silver, and whoever wins enters the tournament. Everyone thinks she's going to struggle, but when the fight starts, she kicks him and wins the fight instantly. But even though it's over, she keeps trying to fight because, in her mind, she still thinks she's training. After that, Rionette and Meist arrive, and Rionette asks if they found the magic jewels in the Empire. But Meist says that the information was wrong. Bronston also arrives, and while everyone is eating, Rick praises Angelica for having learned quickly from the training. She doesn't think she has enough time to learn everything, but Bronston explains that even if she trains for a short time, her efforts will still be rewarded. The tournament finally begins, and when the matches are announced, Angelica realizes that Gaff won't be facing Orwulf or Bronston until the finals. She thinks they're going to make Gaff look strong by fighting weak opponents, and when the odds are stacked against him, Snape will bet on his opponent and make a fortune by making Gaff lose on purpose. But she plans to put a stop to their plans by fighting him in the second round. Orwulf and the old man approach Bronston and Rick, and the old man comments that Orwulf still looks the same as when he arrived at his academy. Then we go back to when Orwulf entered the academy, and the old man says that they have a fighter who made the top 4 in the tournament. Orwulf asks to fight this guy, thinking he could beat him easily, but ends up losing the fight. After tasting defeat for the first time, his attitude changes, and he starts training nonstop, which leads to him becoming the new champion. When the first fight begins, Gaff's opponent tries to punch him several times, but to no avail, and Gaff defeats him with a single blow. The audience is shocked by his strength, but Rick thinks there's something strange because, although Gaff is strong, his movements look like those of an amateur. The other matches continue, with Rick and everyone else moving on to the next round. In the final round of the first fight, Orwulf faces a man called Eddie. When the fight begins, Eddie goes on the offensive, but Orwulf immediately hits him with a punch. Rick thinks that Orwulf already knew exactly how Eddie was going to move, and Bronston comments that Orwulf has a great sense of smell, which is why he can feel the change in electrical signals and adrenaline. Suddenly, Orwulf is knocked down by Eddie after a blow, but Rionette observes that Orwulf let himself be hit on purpose. When Eddie tries to attack once more, Orwulf knocks him to the ground with a strike, thus winning the fight. The next day, Angelica's match against Gaff is about to start, and Snape asks Rick if he can sit with him, which makes him wonder why Snape isn't sitting in the VIP area. But he explains that the match is between his brother and his fiancée, so he needs to watch closely. Meanwhile, Angelica approaches Gaff before the match, saying she's going to show him the results of her training. But he insults her because she's weaker than him, even though he's never trained and only spends his father's money. She thinks he's lying because it's not possible to have such a well-defined physique without training, but he just says he'll avoid hitting her stomach so she can still have his brother's children. When the match begins, Angelica hits Gaff, but her attack has no effect on him. So she removes her strengthening magic, which surprises him, but by attacking him again, she manages to wound his body, making him bleed. Snape is shocked, as not even the sharpest blade could wound Gaff's body. But Rionette tells him that Angelica used a mana manipulation technique. Although she didn't manage to learn it completely during her training, she continued training on her own. So by mixing it with reverse mana reflection, she managed to develop this technique with her own efforts. Meist explains that it's a technique for temporarily storing mana in the body and instantly releasing more mana production than normal, and it demands a lot from the body. But Angelica can use it easily after going through the hellish training over the last month. She keeps attacking Gaff, which makes him very angry, so he punches the ground, causing the arena to fill with dust. He tries to launch a surprise attack, but she manages to dodge. And once again, he uses the same strategy, but instead of attacking from the front, he gets behind her and sends her into the wall. She uses the instant step, but is shocked that he managed to learn this move after just watching her, and again lands a blow that sends her flying. Snape tells Rick that the first time he met Gaff was when he was trying to make a name for himself as a fighter, and Gaff beat him easily, which made him decide to retire. Snape knows that everyone thinks he's rigging the fights, but he reveals that before the tournament started, no one thought an unknown fighter like Gaff would be able to win, so he bet everything on him. During the fight, Gaff insults Angelica and her parents and keeps hitting her until she runs out of steam. But when she refuses to give up, Gaff starts to feel like killing her. As he prepares to finish her off, Rick throws his shoe at him, causing his attack to fail. After the match, Gaff approaches Rick and tries to fight, but Rick says he's going to crush him in front of everyone. After Rick wins his match, he goes to see how Angelica is, and the nurses explain that she is not in danger of dying, but will need time to recover from her injuries. Meanwhile, Bronston and Orwolf win their matches, and the 4 finalists of the tournament are decided. The next day, Angelica apologizes to Rick, saying that she wasted his time training her. She starts to cry, saying that she did everything she could to win this fight. She continues to cry, saying that she just wanted to make her dreams come true, but she's beginning to think that maybe she should accept Snape's proposal. Rick thinks he should apologize because Angelica did everything she could, and she couldn't see how strong Gaff was. But he asks her to watch the next fight, because it will show her the pinnacle of skill she can reach. Before the match begins, Gaff apologizes for not killing Angelica, and this makes Rick furious. Then, as the fight begins, Rick punches Gaff in the face, causing him to fall to his knees. Gaff tries to hit back, but Rick dodges and hits him again, causing Gaff to bleed. Angelica is shocked by Rick's strength, but Rionette reveals that he barely put any power into that attack, explaining that he used a penetrating attack, which causes internal damage to the body. In other words, no matter how tough Gaff's body is, he's still going to get hurt. Gaff then uses strengthening magic and tries to attack Rick, who starts to retreat, but Gaff catches up and knocks him down. Bronston realizes that this strengthening magic is consuming a lot of mana, and Snape notes that Gaff has never trained to increase his mana, meaning that the mana everyone is seeing there is only the mana he was born with. This makes Rick angry, as he has had to train a lot because of his lack of mana. Rick lands another penetrating blow, but this time it has no effect, and Gaff returns several attacks. Snape thinks the fight is over, but Bronston realizes that Rick doesn't care what the others are seeing in the arena. He only cares what Angelica is seeing. Gaff continues to hit, but starts to get breathless, and is surprised to see that Rick hasn't suffered any damage. Rionette explains that Rick used a body manipulation technique, which disperses the impacts on his body, meaning that he didn't suffer as much damage from these attacks. Gaff realizes that Rick is holding back, limiting his own physical abilities to Angelica's level, just to show her the true potential she can achieve. Gaff becomes enraged and covers his body with steel, charging at Rick, but Rick shatters his armor with a single penetrating attack. Rick realizes that Gaff's magic wasn't effective because he's very tired, and all this is happening because he's never felt tired in his life, so he doesn't know how to move when he's exhausted. Snape asks if Rick is a greater prodigy than Gaff, but everyone says he has no talent, and that the only reason he's winning is because of how hard he's worked. Rick tells Gaff that he is indeed a prodigy, but true prodigies hone their strengths, and Rick knows this because he's seen them up close. Gaff is furious and transforms into his dragon form. He begins to strike Rick, who tries to fight back but realizes that his attacks aren't working. He notices that Angelica, at her current level, can't defeat Gaff, so he starts increasing her speed and power, which makes her realize that he's showing her how strong she'll be if she keeps training for a year. Rick knocks him down and says that the only way for him to win is to fight with his willpower, but Gaff refuses. So Rick decides to end the fight. Gaff then punches the ground to fill the arena with dust, but Rick uses a move that Angelica used, and so he manages to defeat Gaff. But he still feels that he can't do this move correctly because if it had been Rionette, this blow would have cut Gaff in half. Rick wins the fight, and Angelica thanks him for the lessons and promises to become an even stronger fighter in the future. Snape admits that he's surprised by the result, but mentions that a part of him wanted Gaff to lose, as he was the one who ended his career as a fighter. Snape notes that even though he lost, he feels good and thinks it's a shame he can't marry Angelica. But that's okay, because she thinks he only wants to marry her because she's a noblewoman. The truth is that he really likes her. The next fight is about to start, and the old man tells Werewolf that he is the strongest fighter and asks him not to hold back during the fight. We see that his opponent is now Bronston. When Werewolf is about to enter, the announcer introduces him as the champion, and the crowd goes wild. Rick realizes how much everyone loves him. The fight begins, and Werewolf starts hitting Bronston, who easily blocks his attacks and counters, creating a shockwave that impresses the crowd. Werewolf says that Bronston is the strongest opponent he has ever faced. But suddenly, the wall shatters and Jeet appears. He begins to rage and attacks the people in the audience while Snape realizes that his dragon blood has made him go berserk. Werewolf tells him not to interrupt the match, but Jeet advances against Werewolf. So Werewolf stops him and sends him flying with ease after a devastating blow. Everyone is surprised that Werewolf was able to defeat Jeet with one blow, and Rionette reveals that Werewolf is on the same level as an S rank. The announcer apologizes for the incident and says they're going to reschedule the fight for tomorrow. Werewolf thinks it's a shame as he was starting to enjoy the fight. Bronston agrees, but says he realized Werewolf was still holding back. Later that day, we see Rick out for a run, and he arrives at the border of the country where he sees Werewolf training. Werewolf explains that he decided to train there because he wanted to be alone, but Rick showed up at the perfect moment as he was looking for a training partner. Suddenly, Werewolf attacks him, and Rick realizes he has no choice but to strike back. He punches Werewolf, who manages to block it. Rick is impressed that Werewolf managed to react in time and asks why he was hit by such an attack in the tournament. Werewolf explains that he loves to fight. We learn that when he started taking part in the tournament, he defeated all his opponents with a single blow, but he got tired of fighting because his opponents were no match for him. One day, he overheard the old man talking to one of his business partners. The conversation was about the public getting bored because nobody stood a chance against Werewolf. He explains that this was bad for business because the fights had lost their popularity and people had stopped training at his gym. Then Werewolf realized that he was causing problems for the old man and decided to lose his next fight on purpose. He realized that this got the audience excited, so he decided to entertain everyone during his fights, pretending that he's having a hard time against his opponent. He tells Rick that he's never fought using his full strength, so Rick tells him that he won't have to hold back against Bronston. The next day, everyone gathers to watch the fight between Werewolf and Bronston. The announcer explains that the arena staff have installed defensive magic to protect the viewers. The fight begins when Werewolf covers his arm with a vortex of wind and starts to attack, but Bronston counterattacks, forcing him to retreat. Bronston knows that Werewolf is still holding back and asks if it's because of the audience. Werewolf admits that it's true and says that he can't show all his power, otherwise, everyone will find out that he's fooling them. Then Bronston decides to take it easy on him, saying that he'll only use 2 fingers to hit back and that he won't move from where he is. Werewolf advances, but Bronston manages to grab him and knock him to the ground. Werewolf manages to escape, and the crowd begins to applaud him. He thinks about going all out, but doesn't want everyone to see his power. The old man then calls him an idiot, telling him to stop holding back, and reveals that his dream is to train the strongest fighter in the world. He says that he wants Werewolf to become the strongest. Then Werewolf decides to stop holding back and attacks Bronston, who uses his whole hand to defend himself, and then explains that he is blocking with an appropriate level of power. Werewolf manages to land a kick, but his kick has no effect, and Bronston throws him away. Werewolf uses his steel body before crashing into the wall and says that he's having fun with this fight. But everyone starts to hate him as people realize that he's been fooling everyone. He doesn't care and attacks with a level 5 fire spell, but Bronston creates a stone wall to defend himself and shatters it to attack Werewolf, who manages to close the distance. Werewolf uses a level 7 spell to contain Bronston, then uses an advanced level 8 spell. Angelica can't believe that there is such a thing as a level 8 spell. The spell summons a huge meteor to fall from the sky, and Rick starts to panic because Werewolf is so strong that Bronston might stop holding back. Bronston frees himself easily and punches the meteor, shattering it completely. Angelica can't believe he destroyed a level 8 spell with brute force alone. Bronston mentions that he can feel Werewolf's conviction to fight through his attack and decides to reciprocate. Rick realizes that Bronston is about to go on the offensive. His first move is to attack Werewolf with a shockwave that knocks him down, making everyone realize how ridiculously strong Bronston is. Werewolf uses all the spells at his disposal to attack Bronston, but nothing works against him, so Werewolf runs out of mana. Bronston then advances and unleashes a devastating blow that knocks Werewolf down. Rick knows that Werewolf was able to use defensive magic to block, but realizes that he is in terrible condition and is thinking of giving up. But Werewolf remembers that he always wanted to fight someone stronger than him, so he gets up and powers through, though exhausted when he realizes he's reached his limit. At this point, everyone starts cheering him on, so he gets excited and combines all his skills, attacking with everything he's got. He manages to hit Bronston, and everyone is impressed by his power, but Bronston is still standing and asks if he has finally managed to unleash his full potential. Then Werewolf tells Bronston that he didn't hold back and comments that at least he managed to get Bronston out of his seat, and that it was the most fun fight he's ever had. After hearing this, Bronston delivers the final blow, thus defeating Werewolf. After the fight, Rick and Angelica congratulate Bronston. Rick mentions that Bronston just needs to leave the arena to give them the magic jewel, but Bronston says he's looking forward to the fight and leaves while Angelica realizes that Rick is going crazy after hearing that. Now we see Werewolf reading the newspaper and realizing that everyone hates him for deceiving them. He asks the old man if he's okay with what's going on, and the old man explains that everything will be fine and asks Werewolf about his last move. Werewolf says he was so focused on that moment that he doesn't even remember how he did it. He thinks he's lost everything now and asks the old man why he hasn't left yet. But the old man tells Werewolf that he can still recover and that nothing people say matters because, for the old man, Werewolf is like his son. Bronston suddenly arrives and asks Werewolf about his injuries. Werewolf explains that he's still feeling pain, so Bronston offers to heal him. But Werewolf explains that he wants to feel the pain and tells Bronston that he's looking forward to watching the final match. Meanwhile, Rick has locked himself in his room, and Angelica asks him to come out, but he refuses, saying he doesn't want to die. Snape tells him that everyone is excited to watch the final match, but Rick values his life more, and that's why he doesn't want to fight. Snape then starts complaining, saying that millions of people have worked hard to make the tournament possible and that countless fans are looking forward to watching the final match. But as Rick is too scared to fight, he has no choice but to abandon his dream. Rick starts to feel terrible, and Angelica reminds him that Bronston can revive him if he dies. But Rick explains that death is a traumatic experience and says that she will never understand what it's like to go through that. She tells him that she used to admire him as her mentor, but now believes she was wrong about him and leaves. After that, we see Meist revealing that Bronston has decided to train Rick because his dream has always been to find someone who could match his fighting skill. But everyone wants Rick to understand Bronston's feelings, and Rionette reminds him that Bronston is looking forward to the battle. In a flashback to 2 years earlier, we see Rionette welcoming Rick to the Fist of Orichalcum. She introduces Bronston as their leader. He greets Rick and immediately realizes that Rick has no talent. So Rick asks if he should give up, but Bronston tells him that he just needs to train harder than everyone else and asks if he's ready to do the hardest training of his life. Back in the present, Angelica says Rick is pathetic and asks if his training with Bronston was really that extreme. Then Rionette explains that Rick's training was insane and says it's a miracle he didn't lose his mind. She realizes that he must have worked very hard since he was already middle-aged and had no skills. But Rionette tells her that he does have a skill, and she explains that it harms his body, which is why Bronston forbade him to use it. We return to Rick, who asks Rionette if she thinks he's that bad. But she says she knows he's not, and that she always intends to support him because he's such a good person. However, even if he wants to give up, she still thinks he should fight Bronston. The next day, the crowd gathers to watch the final fight, and Snape is very worried that the event will be ruined if Rick quits. The announcer explains that the winner will be crowned champion and will receive $300 million in prize money. In addition, the winner will win other rewards, including 2 tickets to the hot springs. We then see Rick getting ready to enter the arena, but he's extremely nervous. So Rionette goes over to him and gives him a bit of motivation. Bronston and Rick enter the arena, and Rick tells Bronston that he'll fight with everything he's got. The fight begins, and Rick attacks with incredible speed, managing to wound Bronston. Snape asks if he used magic, but Rionette explains that they only exchanged 100 blows in an instant, and Rick managed to hit Bronston with his cutting technique. He continues to attack, but Bronston counters with another blow. Angelica notices that Rick is excited and asks Rionette what she told him. Then she reveals that she promised to join him at the hot springs if he won. Angelica asks if she's planning on being intimate with Rick, and when she says yes, Angelica gets shy and says they should just concentrate on the fight. Bronston decides to go on the offensive and launches a flurry of attacks while Rick dodges them all. But Bronston suddenly appears next to him and tries to finish him off. Rick uses a technique called basic air cushion to avoid the attack, and everyone is impressed that he manages to use it without even saying the name of the magic. Rionette reveals that Meist and she taught him how to do it. Rick rushes forward as Bronston tries to blast him, but he leaps into the sky and counters with an overhead kick. Bronston manages to block it. Angelica realizes that a fight between the S-ranks is on another level. Bronston tells Rick that he's gotten stronger and says he's glad Rick had the determination to continue his training. He knows Bronston isn't just complimenting him, as Bronston has never lied. So Rick says it's an honor, but he doesn't think it's enough. He wants Bronston to treat him as an equal. He explains that he knows about Bronston's dream because Meist told him the truth, so he wants to give Bronston the fight he's always wanted. Rick realizes that it's been 2 years since he met Bronston, and now he's a member worthy of staying in the group. So Bronston thinks it's time to tell him about their past, and decides to explain why Orichalcum's fist was created. We go back 46 years and see Bronston as a child. He realizes that he is different from the other orcs. He read books made by humans and ended up learning their language. The orcs understood each other through fighting, but he was too strong to understand them. He started trying to teach the other orcs how to improve their lives, but he ended up being treated like their god, and there was no one to approach him. So he ended up being alone. But one day there was a storm, and when he returned to the others, they were all dead. He felt no sadness for them and realized how alone he was. We see him reading by a fire when he is suddenly attacked by Reinhardt, who is surprised to see him reading a book. He also notices the defeated wyvern next to him, and when Bronston mentions that he defeated it, Reinhardt is surprised that he can speak and apologizes for attacking him. Bronston says he's used to it, and Reinhardt asks to know more about him. He then tells Reinhardt his story, and Reinhardt comments that it's a shame Bronston has never found someone who can fight him as an equal. Reinhardt asks him to try and pursue his dream, one that he couldn't fulfill, and reveals that in the past, he fought alongside the hero Yamato. Bronston remembers reading the book, and Reinhardt reveals that he wrote it himself, which surprises Bronston because it was a story from 200 years ago. Bronston comments that he intends to go after the great monster Kaiser, and Reinhardt says that by pursuing him, Bronston might find the strongest people, ones he can fight on equal terms. So they ended up starting the Orichalcum's Fist group. Bronston soon finds people who are as strong as him, but realizes they excel in other areas. He is looking for someone he can fight with his fists, so he creates a perfect training plan. But Meist thinks it will be impossible for anyone to survive it, so he gives up. But as life is full of surprises, at a certain point, Bronston meets Rick. Rick remembers how Bronston supervised his training every day for all those years and realizes how much time Bronston spent with him. So he wants to give Bronston the decent fight he's always been looking for. Bronston is moved by this, and the two start fighting with everything they've got. Rick decides to fight without fear, and they continue to exchange blows. Meist realizes that the barrier is breaking down and uses divine magic to send everyone away. Werewolf wonders what he's done, and Meist explains that he had to evacuate them for their safety because the barrier will break. Snape can't believe his eyes. Angelica observes that Rick landed more blows, but Bronston's attacks were stronger. Rick ends up getting hit, but refuses to give up. They continue to exchange blows, and Bronston finally enjoys himself, but ends up knocking Rick down and destroying a large part of the arena. When the dust settles, Rick wonders if he's done enough to satisfy Bronston. But he sees that Bronston is still standing, so he knows he hasn't done enough to be considered a worthy opponent. To repay his debt, Rick activates his ability. Bronston is surprised to see this, and little Alice reveals that they secretly trained Rick to help him control his power. He oversteps his boundaries and attacks Bronston, who realizes that he's always been too focused on finding an equal to fight. That mindset prevented him from seeing that he had friends who cared about him so much. They acted secretly, helping a lot in Rick's training, all for this moment. Bronston finally realizes that he's no longer alone. So he attacks Rick head-on, and they both give their all in their final attacks, causing a huge explosion of light. When the dust clears, we see that Bronston is still standing. Rick can't believe his strength, but Bronston thanks him for helping him realize his dream, and soon after, he falls too. When Rick wakes up, he sees Rionette next to him. Mice tells him that he's been asleep for 3 days. He asks why he has the belt, but Bronston points out that although he won the fight, it was Rick who truly won. Then Bronston thanks everyone for helping him realize his dream. After that, they take the second jewel and replace it with a replica. Rick notes that they are one step closer to the Kaiser, so he asks about Reinhardt's age, since the Yamato legend was from 200 years ago. Bronston mentions that Reinhardt has an inherent ability that allows him to live a longer life. Rick asks where Reinhardt is now, thinking he's on a secret mission, but Bronston says he's on the run because he forgot to return some books. Afterwards, Snape tells Werewolf that Rick and Bronston turned down the grand prize. And not only that, but they declined the title of champion. So Werewolf is still the champion, but he doesn't think he deserves the belt. Gold and Milshaw cry as Bronston prepares to leave. When everyone departs, we see that Bronston is happy because now he feels much more comfortable, knowing that he's not alone. The group separates from Angelica, but she says she'll be back because she asked Bronston to train her. Rick thinks she's crazy, but she declares that she's going to catch up with him and even surpass him. He says he's looking forward to that day. He mentions that he's going to run back to the castle for extra training. When Angelica asks how far it is, he says it's only about 3,000 kilometers away. She says he's crazy, and he comments that it took him 3 days to get there. She thinks that's impossible, as it should normally take several months in a carriage. But Alice mentions that they can improve the horse, and Meist uses his magic to make the horse completely tuned. As Rick prepares to leave, Rionette mentions the trip to the hot springs, which makes him very excited as he imagines it. But he says he didn't win. However, Meist comments that the fight was a draw, so they have to decide things by running back to the castle. If Rick wins, he'll be able to go to the hot springs, but if he loses, his training will be multiplied by 100. Alice starts the race, then Meist and Bronston take off running while Rick is devastated. As he runs after the others, he tells Rionette that he's going to win. We see them all heading back to the castle, and Rick thinks about how he's finally achieved his dream of becoming an adventurer. But he knows that this isn't the end, because it means his next dream awaits him, to defeat the great monster Kaiser.